get a little ping in my ear, a little doorbell ring, which says that we're recording. So that means it's another episode of Lockdown Sessions. And today I'm really happy because I've got a fellow Geordie, but with a much stronger Geordie tilt than me, Teresa Peters, Accelerated Coaching founder, formerly publisher. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Hello, Brad. Thanks for having me. I'm great. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to chatting to you again.
Well, look, it's another scintillating episode we've got on our books today, because part of these lockdown sessions, Teresa, have been about really reflecting on what we're seeing, what we're observing, what we're learning about ourselves, about those people around us, whether it's personal or business. So I always ask the first opening question as the same to all our guests, which is, what have you been learning and observing during these 78 days or something of lockdown?
Yeah.
Where are you at with it?
Lots of learning, Brad. So I guess for us personally, in our home, we're two adults. We've got an 18-year-old and we've got 12-year-old twins. And I guess without lockdown, we're all kind of going through transitions and changes as it is. We've got an 18-year-old who's just finished his A-levels and been working in accountancy and been furloughed. We've got the twins that are kind of about to become teenagers and going through various changes, and they're being homeschooled. And then we're used to working from home, Duncan and I, because we founded a company 11 years ago, Relish Publications. Right. And although I've always done my coaching on the side over the past 5 years and then full time the past year, the publishing business has been our baby, and we started that in 2008 through the financial crisis. So that was on the back of Duncan being made redundant. So we've actually gone through this process kind of, previously, where we had to face redundancy and start a whole new business from scratch after being employed in a large organization. So we kind of gone through the motions previously. But what I have learned about myself, certainly over this sort of past 3 months, is kind of when I've worked with clients as well, just how resilient people can be, and obviously how some people are excited for change and love the opportunity and thrive on it, whereas other people are a little bit more resistant. So we've all got different ways of dealing with it. Yeah,
I think it's funny, isn't it? Because people don't know they're resilient until they have to be. Mm-hmm. If you ask someone, are you resilient? They might not know. And then something like this happens and they get to find out, are they resilient? But you talk about kind of some people just love that change. When you made that decision 11 years ago, actually, do you know what? Don't worry about losing our jobs. Let's just set up our own business. That's instant sort of pragmatism there, because you're in control. But within that business, what have you seen now? Because of course, with this crisis, that business shifts a little bit, right? And becomes less profitable from a business perspective. You're back in transition again. How do you deal with it?
So I guess that's why I use the example of 11 years ago, because we set up that business with a 6-year-old and baby twins.
Right, perfect.
From home, from the living room with no internet connection. Anyway, so I think it hasn't been easy, Brad. I'm not going to, obviously, we had a chat in that first week of lockdown, and thank you for that time that you gave me, and it kind of really spurred me on to really push my coaching and keep working through the coaching side, and kind of accept that the publishing side is on hold. But at that point, because we've published 31 books with hospitality, so we're very dependent on hospitality, and obviously that industry has been impacted hugely. And at that time, which I think is the same for many people, when 78 days ago, you kind of sat there thinking, okay, well, a couple of months, we'll see what happens, we'll get back on our feet. And So being pragmatic, as I noticed you just said there, yeah, we jumped straight into, right, I'll just get, just work really hard with coaching, and that's been wonderful to be able to help others and support others through their time of change, and that's inspired me, and so that's really important. But I would say when you look at the transition curve, where you kind of have to accept something maybe over, or the end of something, and you look at, obviously change is situational, but the transition, the emotional toll it takes on you, the uncertainty that COVID brings and lockdown brings and redundancy brings, and people not knowing when they're furloughed if they're ever going to go back to their usual job, all these things. I think for me personally, I went through just sort of this, right, been here before, let's be pragmatic. I'll just do my coaching. My husband, Duncan, business partner, he's worked really hard with using his strengths and talents in other areas. And I'd say over the past couple of weeks, funnily enough, it's really hit us that we actually hadn't accepted that the publishing business, it'll come back, I'm sure, next year at some point. But I genuinely don't think we can make any revenues from that business other than book sales, because of the impact it has on hospitality. So it's accepting things, and it's quite hard actually. We've had a couple of moments where we've got quite stressed and worried about kind of what next. But I think many of us share that. And I heard a lovely quote actually from a lady called Kim Morgan, and she'd said we may find ourselves in the same situation, but we're not all in the same boat. And that's a really nice way to round it. People are worse off, but we must sort of look within ourselves and be kind to ourselves, no matter what sort of situation or boat that we're in,
Well, it's an interesting phrase. I know everyone hashtags be kind, and it becomes a mantra for people. But I'm reminded of my nan, who always used to say, if you put a group of people together in a circle and invite them all to put their problems into the middle of the circle, everyone would take their own problems back. And that's always helped me when I'm going through some kind of change, because ultimately, when you think of that curve, and when that curve started out, it was a grief curve. Kubler-Ross created that as a grief curve, right? To explain how we move through the process of grief, which means it's linked to time and it's linked to emotion. And I think this is really important. And I'm wondering, when you're talking to people now and you're coaching them and you're profiling them, do you see a link between the speed at which maybe some profiles rather than others are moving through the emotions quicker? Are they transitioning at a quicker rate, or what do you see?
Well, so I would generally, the people I've worked with, obviously I do disc profiling. That's something that I'm passionate about, and if you were to look at the profile without the emotion behind it, there are people that work at a faster pace perhaps, and more direct and dominant, and just like a snowplow, and they get through it. I know my profile, when I'm under stress, my D side goes up, and I'll just go for it, like that, like a snowplow. But I think all of us, no matter what style we have, I think the style of coaching is really important as well when we work with these clients. And that is something that I've really stepped back and thought about, because when you look at the Kubler-Ross change curve that you just mentioned, or William Bridges, where you have you've got to accept this. If you're going through this denial stage, the last thing you want is, if you think you might be being made redundant, you don't want to be faced with making big decisions necessarily. You just need somebody to ask questions to help you shift your perspective perhaps, or look at what if the opposite were true. And I think it's really important to get that questioning right in the first place when you're working with somebody in an organisation or an individual. And then in that phase of transition, I think, that can be quite a low point people it's a source of anxiety for many people because of the unknown and not knowing what's going to happen next. So at that point, I think it's key to look at within ourselves and when we've been resilient in the past, look at our strengths. And then that next stage when you think, right, new beginnings, then we start looking at goal setting and setting or using different coaching tools in organizations and individuals. So so that's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, when I'm listening to you, it kind of makes me think a little bit, because that Bridges model, that William Bridges transition model, what I find fascinating about that is actually his opening lines in his documentation, which says actually there's a grieving process that needs to take place in order to be able to transition. And it's that endings phase, before the neutral zone and then the new beginnings. And it's in that ending phase. And I think in organizations, we don't historically, when change occurs, whether it's big structural change, organizational change, or even process change, we're not very good, or I haven't seen organizations be very good at giving people the space to grieve about the old way. It's like, listen guys, from Monday, this is how we're doing it. And I think this might be different, what's happened now with COVID. I sense that psychological safety is going to become critical for organizations, and you, like me, work with leaders, and I wonder, do all leaders have that kind of self-awareness that you were describing there? Not all of them have a coach, right? You and I aren't talking to 500 people a week about how to lead them and their people through this change. So I'm wondering, what would you say to people who are listening to this that want to try and unpick some of those self-awareness bits about themselves to get to a point of being practical and being able to move forward? How do we help people grieve for the old way but accept the new way is coming?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think communication is the key thing, and it's got to be both ways.
Right.
Yeah, I think that in a nutshell, you can go into all sorts of details, but and I think also with many of us working virtually, the communication is it's a whole new way of communicating, isn't it, Brad? It's that we're learning to communicate in a very different way, and to build trust online and to get people working as teams digitally and virtually it's a whole challenge that presents with new challenges. And I think obviously when we go through transition, it's affecting our emotions, our identity, our behaviour, our knowledge. So yes, I think that leaders especially, or managers of teams, having that safe space, especially because they're not in an office environment at the moment, and many may be working sort of on the run in a house full of kids or whatever situations we find ourselves in, that haven't got a space to sound off, have a critical friend, and just be asked those questions and step back and put themselves into the shoes of the other people that are working for them. So I think coaching is a crucial element right now in terms of giving that support that leaders need. And I think communication is the number one.
It's about nuanced communication, isn't it? Because it becomes, this is quite intimate. We invite each other into our homes. I can look on your bookshelf, see what games or books you've got there.
Yes.
If I tilt my camera, you can see my dog's joined us today, one of them. And before, go back 6 months, if Rocky was going to turn up in one of my meetings, it'd probably be a little bit embarrassing. If your 12-year-old suddenly barged through the door, it would be like, kids, I'm working. But actually now it's different. It's almost as if, and I've noticed this on calls. I did a webinar yesterday. We had 70 people on the screen.
Wow.
And at least half a dozen people were on that webinar with a kid on their lap.
Yeah.
And the kids are looking and they're waving, and we're all saying, hey, look, the newest munchkin in the team. And what I noticed and observed, which I thought was lovely, was that the teams were saying, we've had lots of team meetings on Zoom or MS Teams or whatever you're using. with our own team, but we haven't connected with people from outside our team. So companies that are very family oriented, that are big, they might have 100, 200, 300, 400 people on site. You know, you and I might pass each other in the corridor going into work, by the elevator. We might see each other in the canteen, have a little chat, walk to the bus stop together. None of that's happening, those ad hoc interactions. Yeah. And I wonder how, I haven't got an answer for this, by the way, but I wonder how can we help organizations maybe replicate some of that stuff? And I think back to your comment around this transition. If we're in transition, we have to accept that things aren't the new way yet. And I'm trying not to use the phrase the new normal, because I don't know if I just want to go back to a new normal. I think it's just going to be new. It's not about it being normal. People crave this normality. And for me, what coaching does is say, listen, it doesn't have to be normal. Why are we using this phrase, new normal? What about it's just going to be new? And so my question to you then is, how can we help people transition quicker so that the new way can start earlier for them? Because I feel as though people are a little bit stuck.
I think, saying that, my dog's just walked in and licked my hand.
Brilliant. Excellent. Welcome. We'll introduce him to Rocky. Hiya. Up on the sofa. Go on.
So, yeah, going back to, I think that it's being mindful of different communication styles as well, Brad, because I think that if you're quite outgoing and extrovert, then there's that side. You maybe feel a bit more confident speaking on camera and virtually. And for those that are perhaps kind of, it's their worst nightmare. So I'm concerned for some of those people that are perhaps don't want to be in front of a camera, and then they're not communicating and they're not getting to see anybody and becoming quite withdrawn. So I think it's being aware of every style, every kind of person that's in your business or outside your business, family, friends as well, that some don't want to get on a camera and talk like this, and then they're actually not communicating at all, and the dog's just completely put me off.
That's brilliant. That's all right, they can come and play. But no, when you say that, it's true, right? I know even from my own family, right? We have a weekly family Zoom where me and my 3 siblings, my parents, their kids, we all join. You know, we're all scattered around the place and not all in the UK. And it's probably more for my mum and dad, because me and my siblings talk to each other anyway during the week. We don't actually need a Zoom to keep connected. But it's a lovely opportunity for us all to be together. And if I go back 3 months, trying to get my mum onto FaceTime or a WhatsApp call, I would normally have the view of, she'd be sitting at her dining room table and her iPad will be on its sort of stand. And she wouldn't either have the camera on her, it would be like her and my dad would sit wide of the camera, and I get a perfect view of the back door.
Yeah. Or their ear.
or their nose, right? Mum, I can see your nose. And now, actually, they're front and centre. And what I've observed during this lockdown period, away from the transition talk, is actually we've connected every generation to this digital world. It used to be, you know, just the Gen Z and the millennials who live in their digital technology, and our generation, whether it's baby boomers or XYs, we're kind of in varying degrees leveraging technology. But I heard my dad say, you know, the other day, oh, this is so cool. This is where technology is brilliant. You know, and I found myself saying to him something a friend of mine had said to me, Dad, you've had that in your pocket for the last 10 years. You just never used it.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you know, 78-year-olds are, my mum's sending out Zoom invitations to her friends, and they have little drinks on a Friday night where they all get dressed up and have cocktails.
I think, do you know, isn't that brilliant? And I think you just hit on something there, Brad, that they had something in their pocket that they didn't use. Now, I love that little phrase, because that is something that I believe when you asked about helping people through transition, it is looking at those strengths and those little things that we have in our pockets that we haven't been using, and using those finally once and for all, and being optimistic and positive and moving forward and using the, you know, what we have in our pockets.
and maybe to your point then, this is, you know, where the change and transition links to things like the adoption curve. You know, there are some who are trailblazers, there are early adopters, there are those that come in the majority phase, and then you've got those that lag a bit behind. Yeah. And those that have lagged behind have reached a point during this lockdown where if they don't get on board, they're going to lose all sense of communication and connection.
Yeah, and we know that if we don't change the way we do things, we can't change the outcome, can we? And and I think it's, you know, the event plus reaction equals the outcome. And we've got COVID-19 lockdown. It's an event, it's a change, but how we react to it is, you know, it affects the outcome generally. So if we react positively, and going back to that circle where you mentioned about putting notes in about the, you know, your circle of influence, that is a really nice way to work with clients. I think in terms of, you know, getting some post-it notes and writing in there all of the things you can control within this circle. And then as you know, with the Covey thing, your Covey model, you've got your circle of concern on the outside and your circle of influence on the inside, and we need to push that circle of influence and don't let external events control us as much, and try and change the way we think about the things we can't control. And I think that's kind of something that I've really tried to instill in my kids as well. And I think it's not just about clients and coaching, it's not just about me, it's about how we work together as a family, how organizations work together, and how we all communicate. And so I think it's how we've responded in this household, I'd love to think has impacted on how our children will cope in the future with big changes that we've had to deal with in the long term.
I know I would have found it hard being aged somewhere between 16 and 25 during this time. Yeah. No question, that disconnection from people. I wonder if there was like a top tips that you could share with people, ways to help them move forward. What would you guide people to focus their attention on?
Big question.
Yeah, I should have maybe sent that one to you beforehand to let you think about it.
To think about it.
Rather than throwing it at you.
No, I think it's focusing on the outcome and the win-win situation. And I know it's a lot easier for some than others. That's why I'm trying to be mindful with how I present this. But focusing on what you can control and focusing on what you can do about it is key. It's easier said than done for many of us, because we have all sorts thrown at us. There might be health problems, other things going on as well as work, so I think it's kind of focus, being present. Yeah. Is certainly key as well, and then obviously having your plans, and it will be a rocky road to get there. Mentioning Rocky in there, because
nice
we know
touch.
You love Rocky.
Very nice touch.
little pun, but I think that being present as well. So something that has actually helped me, I anchor things a lot. So I do this with my index finger and thumb. And I'm not an NLP expert by any stretch, but I do love the idea of kind of being in the moment and trying to, if you're all sort of stressed about something. So when I'm running, I go for a run or a bike ride, and I see a view of the sea or beautiful fields, and I just think, wow, I'm in the moment, I'm in the zone. I'll do my anchoring. The other week there was some satellites flying across the sky, and we all looked at 10 o'clock at night and was watching those. I anchored it. And so whenever I am in that moment where I get overwhelmed, and I certainly have done over the past few weeks at points, I think anchoring, being present, and just breathing and just sort of stepping back, probably the best advice for everybody generally, no matter what situation they find themselves in.
Yeah, psychologists call it cortical facilitation, which is what you're describing, this anchoring presence, which is basically when you learn to push pause. It's like a freeze frame. And I use the analogy of, when we watch live TV today, you can just pause it. You don't have to miss anything. It used to be if you needed the bathroom in the middle of a TV show, you had to wait for the adverts if you didn't want to miss anything, right? And you would run up the stairs, go to the bathroom, and then come back down and carry on watching. Now you just push pause, and you might leave it on pause for 25 minutes while you go off and do a couple of other things, and then come back and carry on. And I think this idea of helping, I love this idea of being present, focusing on what we can control, not what we can't, because if you worry about what you can't control, well, that's just a dead end. You're not going to go anywhere there. But this idea of being able to create in our mind's eye a happy space. So for me, why I love that so much is it acknowledges that there are tough moments. And I know I was sharing with someone the other day, I realized that I had 4 or 5 days where I had been just a little bit, I'm high energy, I'm essentially positive every minute of my working and waking day. And I realized when I was reflecting at the end of the week that I'd run over 120 kilometers that week, and there'd only been 6 days, which meant I was running a half marathon each day. And it's like, what are you running from, Brad? Why are you're running for 2 hours a day? 40 minutes is enough. Normally I would watch like an episode on Amazon Prime of my favorite show or Netflix, and that's a run. If I'm not going out on the road, because the weather's been a bit ropey recently. I ran literally 120 kilometers, and I realized when I run, I feel better. That's my space. And it was only looking at my data and thinking, oh my God, that's 12 hours of running in 6 days, Brad. It's okay to be a bit blur. And then it's about, well, okay, so what do you do in that moment? What I do is I go and I run, so it fills me up, so I then don't take my negative energy out on those around me. And it's this focus on what can I control? What can I do to make me feel better? And I think a lot of people who might even be listening to this, when they get into that space, they get consumed by it. I wonder if you've got any tips or guidance on, because you've talked about how we can ask these questions, we can develop our self-awareness, we can be present. What about, how do we make sure that we don't get consumed by the more negative feelings, almost diving straight in and just falling down and just getting sucked in to the negative? How do we help people stop that process?
I think that technology, as powerful and as brilliant it has been over the past 3 months, that it has a lot to answer for in terms of inducing negativity. And I think that sort of even things like the news, I actually did a confidence coaching workshop with a few people about a month ago, and they asked me, and they really loved this answer, and it was so simple. I just said, well, we can use the government website to catch up on the actual news and the new laws, and then just keep away from the rest. Just go on, be mindful of, right, I'll check that once a day, see what the new laws are, what we're allowed to do, and I don't have to listen to the rest. So just little things like that. Social media, but obviously I think the time we're spending on screen right now is more than we've ever done previously. And I think that can have a draining, negative impact on our emotional well-being. So again, sort of setting a time limit and a time to do that. And then another thing I've found is I've used Zoom calls for business and not this is just me personally, and everyone has their own way. But I found it quite exhausting to coach online one-to-one, do workshops, and then talk to family and have. So now we're using WhatsApp groups or FaceTime for that kind of thing. So it sort of compartmentalizes work from social, and then it kind of just feels different, because everything's just on the screen. So I think if there was one thing, it would be certainly the technology and managing that. And I think that also what I've found is that at the start with lockdown, we kind of just continued from our previous life and gradually molded into this new way. And now it's time to sort of step back and think, right, things are different. So how am I going to manage this? I'm on Zoom all the time. I need to sort of change things here. I need to use my phone less for this. And some phone calls, take when you're walking the dog, maybe, put headphones on and not hold a phone, just little things that are psychologically, they're just different. So just maybe, and I love, on one of your YouTube videos when you talk about leaning into a situation and then stepping back and stepping out of it. If we can do that with technology, I think that'll have a huge impact on people generally. And then when you say about going running, not everyone can run, but if you just to have that space. But I think to really round it up, Brad, I think it's to do everything with intention. With intent. If you're going to do something, do it and mean it, and then move on to the next thing, rather than everything blurring, all the boundaries blurring.
Maybe that actually brings us full circle, Teresa, because when we started this conversation, you're talking about that change curve and how you need to really proactively make a decision to move yourself forward. And actually, we're there again, aren't we? That even with technology, which we can leverage, and I celebrate. I echo you. If I'm out with the dogs, and my mum she'll call me directly on FaceTime, and we'll have a little chat. I've actually now put Zoom onto my mobile as well, so that my family Zoom calls I can do in the house. So I don't want to sit in the office on a Sunday afternoon having tea with my family. I want to be with my family and not have them have to come in to say hi everyone and then drop off. And I think that intention that you talk about for me is about what keeps me present. If I do it with intention, I can move through that curve. If I do it with intention, I can leverage technology in a positive way. And it seems like we've done a beautiful circle there.
I was deliberate.
Yeah, I love that. That's brilliant. Well, Teresa, look, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I've loved this. And I think what we should do is come back in a couple of months and see what's actually happened. Yeah,
what the new beginnings are.
Right, and then take a session on what the recovery phase means for us as coaches and profilers, and see what we can offer to our audience then. How about that? Will you come back?
Of course I will. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, Brad.
Brilliant, Trace. I'm going to push stop and we'll push it out online next week.
Thank you.